Picture this: a bustling airport terminal at New York's John F. Kennedy International Airport. Thousands of travelers hustle through security lines, rushing toward distant gates, each person carrying hope, anxiety, or excitement for the journey ahead. Among them stands a determined teenage girl named Ebony Smith, gripping her backpack and her ticket for flight AA292. Unbeknownst to her, she is seconds away from an incident so shocking it will echo on every social media feed by nightfall. What starts as casual prejudice and a routine seat dispute spirals into an explosive confrontation, leading to an unforgettable showdown on the tarmac, one that will shake the airline industry to its core. Ebony Smith had been looking forward to this day for months. That morning, the sun had barely risen when she and her mother Angela left their home in suburban Philadelphia for the drive to New York's John F. Kennedy International Airport. Ebony could hardly sleep the night before, her mind racing with anticipation for the leadership conference in San Francisco. It was no ordinary conference either. It was organized by the esteemed youth innovators of tomorrow YIT, known for launching talented teens into early college programs and major scholarship opportunities. Ebony's mother had scrimped and saved for the registration fee. With Ebony's father, David, often abroad for work, Angela had taken on extra shifts as a nurse to ensure Ebony had this shot at success. The Smiths came from a line of proud educators and community leaders. Even Ebony's grandmother, Harriet, once held a seat on the local school board. She instilled in Ebony that an education can fight any battle. Ebony took that to heart. She was a star student carrying straight A's through high school, a member of the debate club, and a passionate advocate for social justice. At just 16, Ebony's eyes were already set on attending Howard University to study political science. It was this blend of intelligence and ambition that drew the attention of the YIT organization, awarding her a partial scholarship for their annual leadership event on the West Coast. Because she was traveling as a minor, Ebony's parents originally planned to accompany her. But David's last-minute business trip to Asia complicated those arrangements. He had only just returned to the United States the night before and was exhausted. Angela couldn't get additional time off on such short notice. Convinced by Ebony's maturity and the fact that YIT provided chaperones and staff for underage participants, her parents let her board flight AA292 alone. Ebony's mother dropped her at the departure gate, gave her a last hug, and went home brimming with pride. Everything about Ebony's day seemed set up for success, from her neatly packed bag, with color-coded files for the conference workshops, to the crisp pantsuit she wore that morning. She clutched a folder detailing the conference itinerary while juggling her boarding pass and phone. All she had to do was sit back, maybe read over some notes, and prepare for a cross-country flight. That was the plan, a simple, normal plan that thousands of Americans follow daily without incident. Little did Ebony know that this very flight would become a national headline and an explosive moment in her life's journey. Ebony arrived at the gate well ahead of time. The flight was operated by American Airlines, one of the largest in the world, known to millions of travelers. Gate attendants were cheerful in their announcements, and the slow process of boarding commenced. First class and executive platinum flyers were beckoned, then parents with small children, then general boarding groups. Ebony held a Group 4 boarding pass. She watched as a wave of passengers made their way through the jet bridge. Finally, the electronic screen flashed her group, and Ebony joined the line. Her heart pounded with a mixture of excitement and nerves. She was traveling on her own, entrusted with representing her school and her family at a national event. Ebony fidgeted with her phone, triple-checking that she had no missed calls or texts from her mother. The line inched forward, and the gate attendant scanned her pass. With a polite, "Have a nice flight," the attendant let Ebony down the jet bridge. Stepping onto the plane felt like crossing a threshold between a world she knew and one she only dreamed about. The ambient hum of overhead lights, the faint smell of coffee, and the muffled voices of passengers arranging themselves in overhead bins filled the cabin. She followed her seat assignment, 17B, and found it sandwiched between a middle-aged woman reading a fitness magazine and a teenage boy who looked about the same age as Ebony, but wore headphones blaring music so loud she could practically hear the lyrics. Trying to make herself comfortable, Ebony slid her backpack under the seat in front of her. She had carefully placed her laptop and notebooks at the top, ready for a mid-flight study session. Her father always joked about Ebony's "be ready for anything" spirit inherited from her mother. Ebony was about to buckle in when a flight attendant approached. "Excuse me, sweetheart," said the attendant, a woman in her 50s named Marion, according to her name tag. "The window seat passenger is coming through." Ebony shifted out of the way as a tall man wearing an expensive suit arrived. He took a cursory glance at Ebony and sighed as if annoyed by her presence. After settling, he draped his designer jacket over the back of his seat and promptly claimed the armrest, leaving Ebony with nowhere to rest her elbow. It was a small inconvenience, but Ebony shrugged it off. She had bigger things to focus on, like her upcoming presentation. The cabin door was about to close, and Ebony anticipated a smooth flight. Still, she felt a hint of unease. The energy in the cabin was tense in a way she couldn't pinpoint. She chalked it up to pre-flight nerves, reminding herself that her mother had prayed over her trip that morning. If anything, Ebony's personal mantra was, "Stay calm, stay strong." When the flight attendants started their safety demonstration, Ebony followed along. She had flown before, but her mother always insisted on paying attention to instructions. The older flight attendant, Marion, continued up the aisle, double-checking seatbelts and overhead bins. Suddenly, she paused near Ebony's row, focusing intently on Ebony herself. "Are you traveling alone?" Marion asked, her tone polite, but with a faint edge. "Yes, ma'am," Ebony responded. "I'm going to a conference in San Francisco." Marion gave Ebony a tight smile, nodded, and moved on. Ebony couldn't shake the feeling that the attendant's stare lasted a second too long, as though scanning Ebony from head to toe. Moments later, Ebony noticed the same attendant whispering something to another crew member, then glancing back in her direction. Ebony's pulse quickened. She tried to push aside any paranoid thoughts. Maybe they were just ensuring a minor was okay. But Ebony also knew how subtle things could escalate. She'd read headlines about black passengers facing indignities during flights, and she prayed that wouldn't happen to her. A jolt ran through the plane as it pushed back from the gate. Ebony exhaled relief that takeoff was imminent. She plugged in her earbuds and tried to relax with some mellow R&B tracks, yet her mind lingered on the flight attendants' suspicious glances. She couldn't decide if it was real or just her nerves. For a few minutes, Ebony slipped into her music. The plane taxied, paused, then accelerated for takeoff. Once the aircraft settled at cruising altitude, Ebony opened her folder of conference materials. She had an enter binder her speech draft workshop schedules and a recommendation letter from her principal. Though Ebony tried to focus, she found her eyes flicking around the cabin. Something felt off. She noticed Marion and another attendant conversing in the galley, sneaking looks at Ebony. Each glance was like a pinprick on Ebony's consciousness, fueling a quiet anxiety. Suddenly, the man in the window seat spilled some coffee on his tray table. Ebony instinctively offered him a napkin from her bag. He waved her off, rudely muttering something under his breath. Despite her best intentions to remain calm, Ebony felt her skin prickle at the tension. She clenched her jaw, telling herself it was just a small oversight. Not every ill-tempered action was about race. Still, she'd learned the hard way that sometimes the smallest events can erupt into major confrontations when prejudice creeps in. About an hour into the flight, things took a turn. A flight attendant Ebony hadn't noticed before a man in his late 30s named Carl approached Ebony's row with a perplexed look on his face. "Ma'am, I need to ask you to remove your bag from under the seat," he said curtly. "We've received a complaint." Ebony frowned. "A complaint?" "My bag is well under the seat. I'm not blocking any exit row." Carl's eyes narrowed. "The passenger behind you said you kept pushing your bag into their feet. Is that correct?" Alarmed, Ebony leaned sideways to see an older woman behind her, who glared back. Ebony's bag was zipped and neatly tucked in place. It wasn't infringing on anyone. Ebony politely responded, "I haven't moved my bag since I boarded. It's not in the way." Marion, who had been lingering a few rows down, approached. Her expression carried a thinly veiled suspicion. "Is there anything in that bag we should know about?" she asked. Shocked by the insinuation, Ebony tried to remain respectful. "Just my laptop notebooks and some personal items," she said, her voice trembling slightly. She could feel the eyes of surrounding passengers drawn to the confrontation. The atmosphere thickened with that unmistakable hush of tension. The man in the window seat rolled his eyes dramatically. "I heard a lot of rummaging in that backpack," he added. It was distracting. Ebony's mind raced. Why were these passengers and crew so fixated on her bag? She had done nothing out of the ordinary. Meanwhile, the flight attendants eyed each other. In Ebony's experience, these subtle signs of suspicion were all too common. She tried to remain calm, offering to show them her bag's contents if necessary. "Let me see, please," Carl said, embarrassed but determined to clear any wrongdoing. Ebony unzipped her backpack, revealing her laptop and neatly organized binders, the YIT conference pamphlet right on top. Carl rummaged through for a second, flipped a few pages in her binder, then nodded, apparently finding nothing. Marion stared, still looking unsettled. The tension left Ebony feeling helpless. She was keenly aware of how, for some, her mere presence and dark skin could trigger unfounded mistrust. Carl handed the bag back. "Okay," he said grudgingly, sounding neither apologetic nor satisfied. Both he and Marion walked away to return to their duties, leaving Ebony unsettled and humiliated under the gaze of fellow passengers who had witnessed the scene. She tried to regain her composure, adjusting her bag again under the seat and opening her laptop, but her heart pounded. She typed a quick text on her phone to her mother. "Ma, I'm okay, but the flight attendants are acting weird. I'll call you when I land." Then she put her phone on airplane mode, praying there would be no more incidents. The flight was just beginning and she was not interested in any more scrutiny. Minutes later, Marion circled back to Ebony, this time with a forced smile. "Can I get you something to drink?" she asked, but her tone was cold. "A water is fine," Ebony responded quietly, not wanting to draw attention. Marion disappeared, returning with a small plastic cup. Ebony whispered a thank you and turned back to her work. She hoped that by keeping her head down, the rest of the flight would pass without further conflict. But her gut told her otherwise. Something about Marion's penetrating stare felt like an accusation in search of a crime. As Ebony sipped her water, the man in the window seat began shifting uncomfortably. He called out to a passing flight attendant that Ebony's elbow was intruding on his space. Ebony looked at him, eyes widened in disbelief. "I'm in my seat," she insisted, hunching her shoulders to avoid any contact. The attendant, a different woman this time, glanced at Ebony as though she were the troublemaker. Ebony mumbled a half apology, even though she hadn't done anything wrong. She just wanted to avoid confrontation. A few rows away, Ebony could see some passengers looking on with sympathetic eyes. She suspected that not everyone believed she was a menace. Some appeared confused or concerned, but no one intervened. People, even if sympathetic, rarely want to become part of an in-flight confrontation. Ebony felt painfully alone. Soon after lunch service began. Ebony received her tray, but she noticed that the flight attendants treated her with an air of caution. They spoke politely enough, but Ebony sensed their forced tone. By contrast, they seemed more relaxed and friendly with other passengers, especially those traveling in groups or families. Around this time, Ebony became aware of a passenger 2 rows ahead, a black woman wearing professional attire, perhaps in her 30s. Their eyes met. The woman gave Ebony a small nod, as if to say, "I see you. I'm sorry." Ebony appreciated the gesture. She felt momentarily less isolated, though the creeping sense of dread remained. She closed her eyes for a moment, recalling her father's stories of racism he'd experienced in the military. He often told Ebony, "You can't let them break your spirit. Keep your head high, stay calm, and remember your worth." Ebony repeated that to herself like a mantra. She tried to steady her breathing and remind herself of her mission, the conference in San Francisco, the speech she was preparing, and the future she hoped to build. 2 hours into the flight, Ebony dozed off. She dreamed about the conference, about speaking confidently on stage, about her mother's proud smile. That was when she felt a hard nudge on her shoulder. She awoke with a start. Carl, the male flight attendant, stood towering above her. "Ma'am, I need you to step into the aisle," he said loudly. Her heart thumped. "Why?" "What's going on?" Ebony asked, confused. Carl's voice cut through the hush of the cabin. "We've received multiple complaints about your disruptive behavior. I have to ask you to come with me." Passengers turned their heads in unison. Ebony's face grew hot with embarrassment, but also with indignation. "What complaints? I was sleeping." Marion appeared behind Carl, arms folded. "We've been told you made threats toward other passengers," she said, voice dripping with accusation. Ebony's mouth fell open, shock overwhelming her. "Threats? Toward who?" She looked at the passengers around her for an explanation, but most avoided her eyes. The man in the window seat piped in. She was muttering something under her breath, talking about "I'll get you all" or something like that. She's been aggressive this entire flight. A rush of panic filled Ebony's chest. She had said no such thing. She had no idea why this man was lying or what hidden motive he had. Meanwhile, a few rows back, the older woman who had complained earlier about Ebony's bag muttered her agreement. It felt like an orchestrated smear, as if they all decided Ebony was trouble and needed to be removed. Ebony searched faces for any sign of someone willing to speak on her behalf. Carl gave Ebony a stern look. "I'm not going to argue," he said. "We can discuss details, but first I need you to stand up and follow me. Failure to comply can result in a federal offense. We take any threat seriously." Heart pounding. Ebony stared in disbelief. "I haven't threatened anyone." "This is a misunderstanding." She pleaded, her eyes watering. She was mortified, scared and angry, a swirl of emotions that made her light-headed. Marion stepped closer, frowning. "We're not here to debate," she said coldly. "Stand up, now." Ebony sensed the magnitude of the situation. If she resisted, she risked being labeled a threat and facing legal charges. She unbuckled her seatbelt with shaky hands and stood clutching her folder of conference materials. She wanted to ask someone to speak up for her, but the mass of staring eyes remained silent. A few phones emerged, recording the drama. Carl led Ebony down the aisle. She felt every pair of eyes on her, as though she were guilty before proven innocent. She felt the overwhelming burden of being a black girl singled out in a plane of mostly white and other passengers who either believed the accusations or didn't care to intervene. Ebony's tears welled up, but she refused to cry in front of them. She clenched her teeth, reminding herself of her father's words. "Stay strong, Ebony." Yet this was a nightmare scenario she'd only ever seen in viral videos, and now she was living it. The next few minutes were a blur. Carl ushered Ebony toward the front galley, near the cockpit door. He motioned for her to stand by a jump seat, while Marion conferred with another crew member via the intercom. Ebony caught snippets of words like threat disruptive and pilot's decision. Adrenaline coursed through Ebony's veins. She wanted to scream that this was a setup, a lie. But she sensed that any outburst would only reinforce their biases. The pilot, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, emerged. He regarded Ebony with a stern expression. "You're the one causing problems?" he asked, not even waiting for Ebony to respond, before turning to the flight attendants. Ebony stood there trembling as the pilot listened to Marion's version of events. He nodded a few times, and Ebony caught phrases like passenger safety and cooperation. When they finished, the pilot fixed Ebony with a gaze that felt more like condemnation than inquiry. "You're a minor," he said flatly, "but we have to ensure the safety of everyone on board. We will be making an unscheduled landing in Chicago to have authorities address this situation." Ebony's knees nearly buckled. Chicago authorities. She'd done nothing wrong. Her dream flight to a leadership conference was turning into a humiliating ordeal. She tried to gather her courage to speak. "Sir, please," she began. "I have no idea why these people are saying I made threats. I was simply—" "We have multiple witness statements," Marion interrupted, as though Ebony's denial was irrelevant. "We have to treat every threat seriously." Tears finally slipped down Ebony's cheeks. She felt the dryness in her throat, the rapid beating of her heart. She thought of her mother, of how worried she would be to learn Ebony was being handed over to police. She thought of her father, David, and how he would never stand for this if only he knew. Her reflection was cut short by an announcement from the pilot over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be diverting to Chicago O'Hare International Airport due to a security concern. We appreciate your patience and understanding." A collective murmur rose from the cabin. For a moment, Ebony feared it would escalate to people blaming her for delaying their travel. She braced for harsh stares from passengers who had no context other than disruptive teen. Within half an hour, the plane descended onto the runway at O'Hare. Ebony was asked to remain standing near the galley as the seatbelt sign dinged on. Her mind was a whirl of confusion, fear, and anger. She thought about the conference she was certain to miss, the embarrassment, the potential legal ramifications. As the plane touched down, Ebony gripped the seat back and silently prayed for deliverance. Once the aircraft parked at a remote gate, Ebony saw two security officers from the airport police step aboard. They were directed to Ebony by Carl and Marion. She noticed how the flight attendants seemed determined to paint her as a dangerous individual. She heard faint gasps from a few passengers filming with their phones. One officer had a calm face. The other looked more stern. "Step off the plane," one officer said. "You need to answer some questions." Ebony nodded, too frightened to articulate much else. She moved toward the exit, where Marion blocked her path to retrieve her backpack. "We'll handle your items," Marion said brusquely, though Ebony suspected this was her attempt to sift through Ebony's belongings without Ebony present. At the door, Ebony tried to glance back for one final look at the cabin, hoping anyone might speak up. She saw the black professional woman craning her neck from her row, wearing an expression of dismay. But she said nothing, perhaps too afraid or unsure to intervene. Defeat and despair welled up in Ebony. She was a minor on her own, outnumbered by authority figures. Her voice felt silenced. As she stepped onto the jet bridge with the two officers, she heard one murmur into his radio. "We have the suspect. Escorting to security. Possible threat." The words stung Ebony, who'd never so much as had a detention in her life. Now she was the suspect in an alleged threat. The unfairness weighed on her like a ton of bricks. Once they were fully off the plane, Ebony tried to maintain composure. "Sir," she said to the calmer officer, "I did not threaten anyone." "I don't know why they're saying this. I was just going to a conference." The officer's stern colleague cut in. "We'll sort everything out soon enough, but we can't let you back on that plane. If they want you removed, that's airline policy. Step along." By then, Ebony was hyperventilating, tears forming again. "I need to call my mother," she begged, "and my father too, if possible. Please." "Calm down, we'll let you make a call," said the calmer officer. "But first, we need to do our check. Standard procedure." They led Ebony to a small waiting area near an airport security office, away from the main terminals. A dull overhead light illuminated worn seats and scuffed floors. Ebony could see her reflection in a nearby window. She looked terrified. Before she could demand they call her parents, the door swung open and a TSA representative flanked by American Airlines supervisors walked in. The accusations were about to compound, and Ebony would soon find herself in the darkest moment of her young life. Back in Philadelphia, Ebony's father, David Smith, was resting from his overseas trip. He was a skilled pilot and ex-military contractor who now owned a small aerial surveying company. Flying was second nature to him. Ebony had grown up visiting hangars and playing with model helicopters. David had parted ways with Ebony that morning, giving her a good luck hug before she left with her mother. He promised to check in on her flight progress after a short nap. At about the time Ebony's plane was supposed to be halfway to San Francisco, David woke up. Something compelled him to check Ebony's flight status. He opened a flight tracker app on his phone, expecting to see her well over the Midwest, but instead noticed the flight had been diverted to Chicago. Concern flared in David's chest. Diverted flights typically meant a medical emergency or some technical problem. He decided to call Ebony. There was no answer. He tried texting. No reply. He called Ebony's mother, Angela, to see if she'd heard anything. Angela, also alarmed, said Ebony had texted her mid-flight, saying something about suspicious flight attendants, but nothing else since. Anxiety swelled in them both. David had a gut feeling that Ebony was in trouble. As a black man in the aviation field, David was no stranger to prejudice. In fact, he once experienced discrimination from an airline staff who doubted the authenticity of his pilot's license. If Ebony was confronted by suspicious staff, especially alone, the situation could escalate quickly. Fueled by paternal protectiveness, David called American Airlines customer service. The representative was polite but unhelpful, merely confirming that the flight was diverted due to a security incident. David demanded specifics, but they refused to share details, citing passenger confidentiality. Furious and worried, David told Angela he was heading to the airport, but she convinced him it would be more efficient to try to reach Ebony or the authorities directly. Storming into his home office, David reached out to a friend in the FAA, hoping to get inside information. But Sunday staff was light, and the friend only knew the flight was on the ground at a remote gate at Chicago O'Hare. No further info was available. David's mind spiraled with worst-case scenarios. Ebony alone frightened, or even in custody. Then David had an impulsive idea, a wild, borderline, reckless thought that only someone with his aviation background might consider. He remembered that his personal helicopter was at a hangar near a small airfield just outside Philadelphia. While it was an unusual distance to cover in a chopper, David's anxious mind jumped to extremes. If Ebony was truly in danger or wrongfully detained, he wanted to be on the scene immediately. He fired off a flurry of texts to Ebony, telling her to hold tight that he was on his way. Then he called his pilot friend Manny, who helped maintain David's helicopter. "Get the bird ready," David barked. "I'm coming, and I need to go to O'Hare. Now!" In the Chicago security office, Ebony found herself subjected to a humiliating search. They asked her to remove her shoes, patted her down, and rummaged through her backpack. She tried to explain the YIT conference, even showing them the schedule and scholarship papers. Each revelation seemed to meet blank stares or disinterest. She was informed that American Airlines staff alleged she was verbally abusive and had threatened to harm passengers. Ebony insisted none of this was true. She pleaded for them to check passenger videos or speak to a passenger who could exonerate her. The older TSA official shrugged. "That's for the airline and the police to figure out," he said. "Our job is to ensure you're not carrying anything that could threaten aviation safety." After they found nothing suspicious among her belongings, Ebony's request to call her mother was finally granted. Her fingers trembled as she dialed. Angela answered, her voice fraught with worry. Ebony burst into tears, explaining she'd been taken off the plane under false accusations. Angela tried to calm Ebony, urging her to tell the officers they would get a lawyer if needed. Ebony's tears flowed freely. She'd never felt so betrayed by a system that was supposed to protect her. She felt like a criminal without committing any crime. Angela promised to try contacting the airline and the Chicago authorities. Just as Ebony ended the call, a uniformed Chicago police officer entered with 2 airline representatives. One was a stern-looking man who introduced himself as Carlton from American Airlines Security Division, and the other was Marion, the flight attendant from the plane carrying Ebony's now sealed backpack. Carlton spoke first. "We're reviewing the situation, but the pilot and flight crew made a decision that you posed a security threat. We have to stand by that decision." Marion gave Ebony a superior glare, as though Ebony were some delinquent. Ebony shot back, voice shaking. "I never threatened anyone." "Why are you doing this to me?" Carlton raised a brow. "We have multiple witness statements plus the flight attendant's accounts." He paused to consult a clipboard. "Passengers heard you say, 'They'll pay for this,' or something along those lines, and you were acting aggressively. We can't take chances in post-9/11 aviation." Ebony's anger flared. "I said nothing like that. Are you really going to treat me like a terrorist because of an untrue rumor?" She tried to contain her outburst, but frustration spilled over. She was a 16-year-old girl with no prior incidents, literally heading to a leadership conference. It felt unreal, like a twisted dream. "You're free to make a statement," the police officer said, his tone impartial, but as far as we understand, the airline is refusing to transport you further. You'll have to find another way to San Francisco or return home. Ebony blinked, stunned. That was it. No due process, no chance to clear her name. She sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. Her dream flight was ruined, her reputation tarnished. She felt powerless, isolated, and deeply hurt. While Ebony was trapped in this bureaucratic nightmare, David was taking extraordinary measures. He sped to the small airfield near Philadelphia, heart hammering in his chest. Manny, his friend and mechanic, had already prepped the helicopter, a sleek Bell 407. Manny's eyes widened when David declared he was flying to Chicago. "That's pushing the limits," Manny warned. "We'll need to make a few refueling stops, and airspace around O'Hare can be tricky." "I don't care," David replied, voice resolute. "My daughter is in trouble. She was dragged off a plane, and I can't wait for corporate red tape to figure this out." With Manny co-piloting, David conducted a hasty pre-flight check. The rotors whooshed to life, kicking up a swirl of dust as they lifted off the tarmac. The plan was to navigate toward Chicago, stopping twice for fuel, then land at a small helipad near O'Hare, possibly arranging clearance if needed. Manny, worried about potential airspace violations, kept radio contact with flight control. David had the relevant licenses and flight experience, but he was running on pure fatherly adrenaline. As they soared westward, David's mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Could Ebony be in custody, charged with a bogus terror threat? He clenched the controls, recalling the vow he made when Ebony was born. "I'll always protect you." At times, Ebony had jokingly called him overprotective, but deep down she appreciated his unwavering devotion. Now that devotion propelled him at hundreds of miles per hour toward her. Meanwhile, Manny tried to keep David calm. "We'll get there, man," he said softly through the headset. "Just keep it steady." David pressed the chopper to its limits without risking a crash. With each passing mile, he grew more determined. He thought about Ebony's bright future, about the promise of that conference. He remembered how Ebony once told him she wanted to be a civil rights lawyer, working to dismantle injustices in the legal system. "Looks like you're going to face injustice earlier than expected, kid," he thought bitterly. After a refueling stop in Ohio, David received a frantic call from Angela. She explained Ebony was being interrogated at Chicago O'Hare and that the airline was refusing to let her fly. Angela's voice shook with rage and worry. David told her to hang tight. He was en route. Manny overheard and muttered something about, "We're coming," Ebony under his breath. David gritted his teeth. If O'Hare or American Airlines tried to stonewall him, he was ready for a fight. Back at O'Hare, Ebony was moved to a more formal meeting room with a large table. The Chicago police officer, Officer Daniels, sat across from her, flipping through notes. Carlton from American Airlines was also present, along with a local TSA official. Marion, the flight attendant, lingered at the back, arms crossed. "All right," Officer Daniels began. "We need your statement. Tell us in your own words what happened on the flight." Ebony inhaled shakily. "I boarded the plane. I sat in my assigned seat. The flight attendants kept asking me about my bag and said a passenger behind me complained. Then a man in my row claimed I threatened him, which I never did. Next thing I know, they said I made a security threat, and I was forced off the plane." "They're lying, and you're traveling alone, correct?" the TSA official asked. "Yes. I'm 16, but I'm used to being responsible," Ebony answered. I'm a scholarship student heading to a Youth Innovators of Tomorrow conference. Look at the folder in my bag, which we did. Carlton interjected. But it doesn't negate the fact that multiple passengers and crew reported you behaving suspiciously. The airline has a right to remove you if they feel threatened. I wasn't suspicious. The man in the window seat was the one who started complaining about me. The flight attendant singled me out immediately. Ebony insisted. I believe they're acting on prejudice because I'm black. Marian's face twitched, anger flashing in her eyes. How dare you accuse me of racism? I've worked with every kind of passenger for 25 years. Ebony met her gaze. And yet you targeted me for no reason. You rummaged through my backpack. You kept glaring at me. And I haven't seen you treat anyone else that way. Officer Daniels held up his hands. Let's keep the personal arguments out of this. The airline staff says they acted on multiple complaints. Whether it was racially motivated or not is a separate issue. Ebony's voice cracked with frustration. It's not separate. That's exactly why this happened. I was humiliated, pulled off a plane, and now you're interrogating me without real evidence. Carlton cleared his throat. We have statements. That's evidence enough for us to consider you a potential threat. Officer Daniels shifted in his seat, somewhat uncomfortable. From a legal standpoint, a passenger can be removed at the crew's discretion. Now, do we have enough to charge you with anything? Possibly not. But we need to be thorough. Ebony's tears threatened to spill again, but she steeled herself. Am I under arrest? She demanded, voice wavering. Daniels exhaled. Not at this moment. No. But the airline has refused further transportation, so either you or a guardian must find another arrangement home or to San Francisco. Ebony wanted to scream. This was so unfair. She folded her arms protectively across her chest. I want to leave, she said, softly. Marian rolled her eyes. Fine by me, she muttered. The group rose. We'll finalize the paperwork, Carlton said. Then you can go. You'll have to make alternative travel arrangements. Ebony was led out of the room, feeling as though she'd just been on trial without a lawyer. She was directed to a waiting area outside security, not even given a voucher or support despite being a minor. She sat on a hard plastic chair, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks as she waited for her father or mother to rescue her. She couldn't help but think, they just left me here like discarded luggage. Several hours had passed since Ebony was forcibly removed from the flight. During that time, David and Manny soared across state lines in their helicopter, refueled again near Indiana, and finally approached Chicago's congested airspace. Manny radioed ahead, requesting permission to land at a smaller local airfield. But David was impatient. He wanted as close to O'Hare as possible. Manny explained that O'Hare typically doesn't allow private helicopters to just drop in, especially unscheduled. They could face serious violations. David's jaw tensed. We'll figure something out, he growled. Manny worried followed protocol with air traffic control, explaining it was a private chopper seeking urgent access near O'Hare. Initially, they were denied. O'Hare was one of the busiest airports in the world, with restricted airspace for large commercial jets. Manny looped in David's FAA friend, who managed to get them at least an approach clearance to a helipad near a maintenance zone. It was an extraordinary favor, but David's connections and the urgency got them a foot in the door. As they neared the airport, the sprawl of runways and terminals came into view. David's heart hammered, imagining Ebony alone, terrified possibly in handcuffs. At that moment, David's phone buzzed. He swiftly handed control to Manny and put on a Bluetooth earpiece. Ebony's trembling voice came through. She was finally able to call with a borrowed phone from an airport staff member who took pity on her. Ebony gave her location and a tearful summary of events. David's blood boiled, listening to her recount the false accusations. "Stay put. I'm at O'Hare in minutes," David assured her. "We'll straighten this out. I promise you." Ebony sobbed with relief. "Dad, they just threw me away like I was dangerous. I didn't do anything." "I know, baby. Hang in there." David ended the call, removing the earpiece as he set his jaw. Manny raised an eyebrow. "We got clearance to land at that maintenance helipad," Manny said. "We'll have to be careful." David nodded, face grim. But a new, more incendiary idea took root in his mind. In the back of his helicopter, he carried a large, bright banner with his company name and a giant red X. Initially used for aerial promotions, David felt an urge to broadcast a message to the entire airport. He was furious at the injustice Ebony had endured. The father in him wanted the biggest protest possible. Manny noticed the fire in David's eyes and looked concerned. "Don't do anything crazy," Dave Manny warned. But David, fueled by parental outrage, was determined to be heard. If the airline wanted to treat Ebony like a threat, maybe they deserved a taste of actual disruption. The fatherly protectiveness overshadowed caution. David adjusted the helicopter's heading. Manny clenched the controls, sweat beading on his forehead. They were about to do something that could be seen as reckless or heroic, depending on your perspective. Inside the O'Hare terminal, Ebony sat slumped in the waiting area. She spotted a sympathetic TSA guard who quietly assured her that her father was en route. Ebony nodded, her eyes puffy from crying. She thought about the upcoming conference. Most likely she'd miss it. The heartbreak of losing that opportunity stung almost as much as the humiliating ordeal. Another wave of tears threatened to overwhelm her, but she forced them back. Then suddenly the entire airport seemed to spring into heightened alert. Ebony watched as uniformed personnel hurried past with radio chatter crackling. She overheard snatches of frantic conversation, unauthorized approach. Some helicopter near the runway. Scramble ground vehicles. Her heart lurched. Could it be? Within minutes, a commotion broke out across the terminal. Through the large glass windows, Ebony saw a helicopter hovering near a runway used for takeoffs. Alarms and alerts swarmed the PA system, announcing ground traffic control directives. The helicopter, dark grey, with a distinctive insignia, circled lower. Airport security vehicles sped onto the tarmac. "That's my dad," Ebony whispered in disbelief, half awed and half terrified. She recognized the shape of David's chopper from countless weekends at the hangar. The disbelief of onlookers quickly turned into frantic curiosity. Travelers pressed against the windows to watch. Some filmed with their phones, capturing the bizarre scene, a private helicopter brazenly defying typical protocol at one of the world's busiest airports. At the control tower, frantic instructions bellowed through headsets. "Helicopter near runway 22. Left, identify yourself. This is unauthorized airspace." Pilots of commercial jets waiting to take off voiced concerns over radio about a rotorcraft obstructing flight paths. But David had Manny at the radio calmly repeating emergency situation. "Minor passenger Ebony Smith has been unjustly detained. We are requesting immediate resolution and will not move until American Airlines addresses the situation." Manny's voice trembled, but he conveyed David's message with as much authority as he could muster. Inside the helicopter, David hovered just above the runway threshold, adrenaline coursing through him. He had no intention of causing a crash or harming anyone. He simply wanted to force the airport and the airline to confront Ebony's situation. Manny fought to keep them stable against the swirling wind currents and the looming threat of ground vehicles that might try to intercept them. Chaos reigned. O'Hare operations suspended all departures on that runway. Incoming flights were diverted to other runways. David's helicopter was effectively blocking normal traffic. Within minutes, law enforcement vehicles formed a perimeter. A standoff was brewing as sirens wailed across the airfield. Meanwhile, Ebony, from her vantage point inside the terminal, stood petrified. She realized her father was risking legal trouble. But a flicker of fierce pride ignited within her too. David would go to the ends of the earth to protect her. She didn't want him arrested yet. She longed for someone, anyone, to highlight the injustice she'd just lived through. Within 10 minutes, a swarm of Chicago Police Department and TSA vehicles flanked the helicopter. Over loudspeakers, an airport official demanded, "Pilot, you are in violation of federal aviation regulations. Land immediately and shut down the aircraft." David looked at Manny, who was drenched in sweat from the tension of the standoff. Manny's shaking hands remained on the control stick. David grabbed the handheld radio. "I'm David Smith," he announced. "My 16-year-old daughter was forcibly removed from an American Airlines flight on false charges of threats. She's alone and traumatized in this airport. I won't leave until the airline publicly acknowledges their mistake and releases her safely into my custody." The official repeated the demand to land threatening arrest. David doubled down. "I understand the consequences, but you will not keep me away from my daughter. Bring Ebony to me. Apologize for what you've done to her, or I'll keep hovering right here." Meanwhile, news quickly spread. Social media lit up with live streams and tweets about a father in a helicopter blocking O'Hare's runway to protest alleged racial profiling. Hashtags like #HelicopterDad and #FlyingWhileBlack started trending. Cable news outlets scrambled to cover the unfolding drama. Air traffic at O'Hare faced massive delays with hundreds of passengers stuck on planes waiting for clearance. Back inside the terminal, Ebony's phone now returned to her buzzed repeatedly from friends and relatives seeing the spectacle on TV. She stood trembling with concern for her father's safety. She overheard airline staff muttering about the insane guy in the chopper. Ebony stepped forward to correct them, but they ignored her. A local reporter who happened to be in the terminal approached Ebony, having recognized her from an overheard conversation. "Excuse me, are you Ebony Smith?" the reporter asked quietly. Ebony nodded, tears in her eyes. "Do you want to share your side of this story?" Ebony hesitated, but realized this was her chance to speak. The reporter, Lisa Reynolds, turned on her cell phone. Camera capturing Ebony's trembling words. Ebony explained how she was heading to a youth conference, how flight attendants accused her of nonsense, how she was taken off the plane. She recounted the false claims of threats, her humiliation, and how nobody believed her innocence. Lisa's face registered shock and empathy. She nodded, letting Ebony speak freely. "Now my dad is out there risking everything to stand up for me," Ebony said, choking back tears. "I'm worried about him, but I'm grateful he believes me. I just want people to know the truth. I never threatened anyone." Lisa posted the footage immediately to her social media feed with the caption, "Teen says she was racially profiled on AA flight. Father stages helicopter protest at O'Hare." Within minutes, Ebony's story was retweeted thousands of times. People outraged by repeated incidents of airline discrimination seized on Ebony's plight as a rallying cry. Others criticized David for endangering flights. But Ebony's earnest testimony swayed many hearts. American Airlines, blindsided by this PR crisis, scrambled to control the narrative. Carlton, the security representative, was inundated with calls from the airline's corporate HQ. The pilot and the flight crew from Ebony's flight were sequestered for statements. The FAA demanded immediate de-escalation. Meanwhile, O'Hare officials considered forcibly bringing down the helicopter, a terrifying option. Tensions soared. A SWAT vehicle pulled up to David's helicopter. Over a loudspeaker, "Land immediately or face consequences." Manny looked panicked, but David held firm. He grabbed the radio. "I'm David Smith. My daughter Ebony was falsely accused and humiliated. I won't leave until she's safe, and American Airlines admits their mistake." Tense silence followed. Then through the window, David spotted Ebony, flanked by a police officer and reporter, Lisa Reynolds. Her shoulders trembled, eyes locked on his. An air traffic controller's voice crackled. "Your daughter is safe at gate G24. Land now. Final warning." David exhaled, torn between defiance and protecting Ebony from further harm. Manny urged David, "We have to land. They'll take us down." David finally relented. He guided the helicopter to a nearby maintenance pad. Instantly, police vehicles swarmed. Officers shouted commands and aimed weapons. David raised his hands, surrendering. Manny followed. As they were pulled from the cockpit, David caught Ebony's eyes across the tarmac. She tried to run to him, but an officer held her back. In that wordless gaze, they shared love, fear, and defiance, captured forever by cameras flashing from every angle. David was handcuffed on the tarmac and taken into custody. Manny, detained alongside him, explained he was only the co-pilot. Meanwhile, the media swarmed the airport. News helicopters hovered and live coverage spread across national networks. Inside American Airlines headquarters, executives panicked. Ebony's emotional video had gone viral. Public outrage exploded. Hashtags like #ProtectEbony and #Dadof. The year trended worldwide. The narrative flipped Ebony was no threat. She was a victim. Passenger videos proved her innocence. Footage showed her sleeping during the alleged threats, while one clip captured the man in her row, making racist remarks. The truth shattered the airline's original claims. The flight attendant's treatment of Ebony reeked of racial bias. The airline's PR team scrambled. Lawsuits loomed. Activists called for accountability. Internally, execs pushed for damage control. Marion and Carl were placed on leave pending investigation. The man who accused Ebony faced possible defamation charges and was banned from flying with the airline. David's extreme protest, once seen as reckless, was reframed as a desperate act of love. He became a symbol of parental courage. The airline had sparked a fire they could no longer contain, and justice was finally turning in Ebony's favor. As Ebony sat in tears at the terminal, American Airlines legal team arrived. Janice Owens, their lead counsel, approached with a calm but rehearsed tone. "Ebony, we deeply regret what happened. Based on new evidence, it seems there was a misunderstanding. We'd like to fly you first class to San Francisco, offer a refund, and issue a formal apology." Ebony stared, hurt and furious. A misunderstanding? My father's in handcuffs for defending me. That's not a misunderstanding. It's injustice. Janice promised to advocate for David, but Ebony refused to be pacified. "I'm not going anywhere until he's free and my name is cleared." Janice hesitated. Her phone buzzed endlessly. Stock prices were dipping, news anchors demanding answers. The company couldn't afford more damage. Finally, she relented. We'll publicly exonerate you and request leniency for your father. Personally, I'm sorry. This never should have happened." Ebony wiped her eyes. "Then fix it. Now." The pressure mounted. The world was watching. The airline had no choice but to act not out of compassion, but survival. And for the first time, Ebony had the upper hand. Within an hour, American Airlines held a press conference. Ebony and her mother Angela, just arrived from Philadelphia, stood nearby. Janice Owens, a corporate spokesperson, addressed the media. "We deeply regret the incident involving Ms. Ebony Smith. New video evidence proves she posed no threat. Our crew's actions were misguided, and we offer our sincere apology. Racial discrimination has no place in our organization. We are reviewing staff conduct and advocating leniency for Mr. David Smith, who believed his daughter was in danger." The statement, though polished, sent shockwaves. Social media exploded with support for Ebony and outrage at American Airlines. Hashtags like #ProtectEbony and #BoycottAA trended globally. Activists called for corporate reform. Meanwhile, David remained in custody, but no longer looked like the villain. Video footage of the flight revealed Ebony asleep during the alleged threats and captured discriminatory remarks from passengers and crew. The narrative flipped. Ebony was vindicated, and her father seen by many as a heroic parent. After negotiations, David was released under the condition he appear in court later. Ebony and Angela embraced him outside the police station, tears flowing. "You didn't let them break me," Ebony whispered. "You flew through it for me." 2 days later, Ebony finally arrived in San Francisco. Though emotionally exhausted, she delivered her speech at the Youth Innovators of Tomorrow conference to a standing ovation. Her ordeal had gone viral, and she now stood as a symbol of resilience against racial injustice. Back home, David faced legal consequences for his protest. Thanks to public support and American Airlines' plea for leniency, prosecutors reduced the charges to probation fines and mandatory safety training. He had no regrets. American Airlines issued new anti-bias policies. Marion and Carl were placed on leave, and the man who falsely accused Ebony faced defamation claims and a permanent flight ban. The incident forced a national reckoning on racial profiling. Ebony accepted a scholarship to Howard University, driven more than ever to become a civil rights lawyer. Her father returned to his aerial surveying business, forever known as that helicopter dad. But to Ebony, he was simply her hero, the man who flew through chaos to protect her when no one else did. Some called it reckless, others called it justice. For Ebony, it was a turning point, proof that courage, love, and truth can shake even the skies. Thank you for joining me on this gripping journey of injustice, courage, and a father's undying love. If Ebony's story moved you, please remember that countless passengers still face discrimination, and these issues only come to light when we refuse to stay silent. We've witnessed how one teen's nightmare turned into a national conversation about racial bias, corporate accountability, and the lengths a father will go to protect his child. By sharing Ebony's ordeal, we stand up for justice, challenging a flawed system to do better. If you believe in fairness and the power of family, show your support by hitting that like button, sharing this story with friends, and subscribing to this channel for more real-life dramas and truths that need to be told. Together we can spread awareness and demand positive change. Stay vigilant, stay strong, and I'll see you in the next video.